So, who's the BB in your life? The boundary breaker. We all got one. People who have boundaries crossed repeatedly are frustrated. In sessions, I often hear clients say, "What is wrong with these people? Why do they act so entitled? Why don't they get it? What do I have to say or do for them to respect my boundaries?" The interesting thing is that the boundary crossers often say, "How do we know what a person's boundaries are? How do I distinguish between a boundary and when someone is playing hard to get?" This is such an interesting subject to explore, just, in general, but also as a therapist, as a clinician. I find it fascinating that boundary breakers, they're thinking very differently than those who are trying to set boundaries for themselves. So it appears that those setting boundaries don't understand why their boundaries are being violated. However, it also appears that in a lot of cases, boundary breakers miss or ignore the clues. The clues seem obvious to those who are being violated, but to the BB, it's not so obvious. So there are some things to learn from this discrepancy. We can't be vague when setting boundaries. When setting boundaries, it's important to be absolutely, fundamentally clear about what is okay and what is not okay, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. You can't be vague about that at all. Number two, boundary breakers often lack self awareness. I know this may be frustrating and annoying, but we have to take into consideration, if we want our boundaries to be respected to some degree, the onus is on us to make sure that all parties involved are clear about what we're communicating to them. And if they lack self awareness or home training or whatever you want to, decorum, sophistication, whatever words you want to use there, if we want our boundaries to be respected, we're going to have to take all of that into consideration without judgment and break it down, break it all the way down to the BB so that they get it. So, of course, there are people who don't care about our boundaries, and that's different. That's an entirely different conversation. I'm only talking about those who, the BBs, the boundary breakers that lack self awareness and don't quite understand or read the clues and cues properly. So today we're looking at BBs who are clueless, and I want to shed light on why they're clueless. BBs, number three, BBs often come off as pushy, needy, and not taking no for an answer. It can feel like they're always looking for a loophole or wiggle room so that they can ultimately have their way. Have you ever met someone like that? You say no, or you say not right now, or you say you're not interested, but they're still trying to sell you the thing. They're still calling. I have, certain people who are trying to buy my car because my car doesn't have a lot of mileage on it. And I am always getting calls from, the dealer wanting to purchase my car. It doesn't have a lot of mileage on it, and I take really good care of it. So they're constantly, constantly, constantly calling, even though I have said in the nicest ways I'm not interested. So the next conversation is a firm do not call me anymore. That's just the way it's going to have to be because they clearly want my car, and my no, I guess they feel can be worn down at some point. Anyway, so number four, things that we can learn from people who BBs, they could possibly be narcissists, but not always. In fact, today I'm looking more at those who are lacking self awareness or who are missing our cues and clues, not, outright narcissists who don't care about your boundaries. So let's look at some of the reasons that BBs cross your boundaries despite you setting them. Some people are conditioned to look for a way around barriers. No matter what, they consider this to be a skill set. Some people were trained to believe that a closed door is an opportunity to find the right key that opens that door. So it's an adventure. It's kind of like, a scavenger hunt. Some people look at dead end walls and, resistance as an obstacle course to navigate. This mentality is very different than the mindset of the person who's setting the boundaries. So one person wants the other to back off and keep some distance, but the other perceives that this is a momentary challenge that just needs to be softened or worn down. There are people who believe that if there is a challenge or an obstacle, it is their job to win the challenge and obliterate the obstacle. This is why BBs can come off as manipulative. But sometimes there's no malicious intent at all. It's just perspective and training, upbringing, community, family, culture. There are many, many variables. And so, although it's frustrating if you've set a boundary, let's say that you don't want to date someone, you've said no nicely, but they keep coming at you. Well, you know, culturally, or maybe just from their upbringing, um, they're here to win you, to charm you, to maybe seduce you. They're here to continue showing their best foot, putting their best foot forward and showing you all that they have to offer until you eventually say yes. As frustrating as that is and as annoying as that may be, from their perspective, from their background, from their community, that might be what people do. And I know that culturally, there are certain cultures where pursuing is very, very much a thing, and it's considered valiant. To show great effort is it demonstrates stamina, and it also demonstrates maturity and seriousness and a commitment to achieving the goal. Sometimes BBs are just immature. Sometimes we're simply dealing with immaturity, and if you meet them in 10 years, they will have learned several things and they won't be crossing boundaries. Sometimes they are self-absorbed and clueless about the impact of their boundary crossing. So sometimes in that effort to get their way, they become a bit self-absorbed and not able to take in your perspective or recognize how their boundary crossing is even impacting you. This is why it's been so interesting as I work with clients, both those who set the boundaries and those who cross the boundaries, because those that are crossing the boundaries don't necessarily feel clear that meant no. It's very confusing to them oftentimes when they're really confronted about repeatedly crossing boundaries, because half the time they don't even realize that they did it. I'm talking about the ones that are clueless, okay, and that are lacking self-awareness, because obviously there's those who know they're crossing boundaries and have no intention of stopping that behavior. So, like I said, many lack self awareness, and some were raised in families that also lack boundaries. Some people were raised in households where there was absolutely no privacy. I see this a lot in families where there's a lot of kids, and maybe there's two parents, two grandparents, and let's say, 5 kids or something like that, 7 kids, something, just a lot of people in the house and a few dogs and cats. Um, in these types of homes, if someone was in the restroom showering or using the toilet, oftentimes other family members still could walk in. Some people were raised in families where eating someone else's food in the refrigerator is okay because it's a free for all. And some people were raised in homes where checking other people's social media, listening to their voicemails, chiming in if they're on the phone, and reading their emails it's just what happens. I mean, there are people who grow up differently, live differently. Maybe you're listening to this audio, um, where privacy is not there, it isn't a thing. And so for people who were raised like that, it's extremely foreign to work with you or to be friends with you or to even date you and not just walk in on you when you're in the bathroom. To feel like they can brush their teeth while you're on the toilet, or to go through your phone, or to go through your wallet to get a $5 bill. There are people that was normal for them. So they don't understand why you're so upset. They don't even realize that they crossed a boundary. So sometimes we say, well, they ought to just know better. Well, sometimes they really don't. And so for those of us that want to have our boundaries respected, the onus is on us to communicate clearly and concisely, but also to be a little bit patient and realize they may actually be clueless and they may be coming from a background that is just completely different or foreign to the way we were raised or the way we think things ought to be. So, for those of you who work so hard to actually have boundaries, sometimes your no is interpreted as a soft no or an obstacle course where the goal is not to stop, but to continue navigating until the other person gets the goal. I know that probably frustrates the heck out of you. A no to BBs, boundary breakers, does not necessarily mean a dead end. And it's important to recognize these differences in train of thought. So, how do you feel when someone crosses your boundaries? Do you immediately go into questioning, are you annoyed? Why are they doing this? What in the world, why would somebody, what happens to you when somebody crosses your boundaries? Do you become frustrated? Sometimes people say to me, well, they just should know better. They should put themselves in somebody else's shoes. If they know me by now, they've got to understand. But think about it. How would boundary-less people just know better? How would they just, how would they get it, right? If they have no boundaries, or if they were raised in a family and community that was lacking boundaries, how do they just know? They don't. As inconvenient as it may be, sometimes we have to teach people what boundaries are while we are setting them. And I know this is frustrating, especially if you're an adult working with adults. You don't feel like it's your job to be their mommy, right? Or their parent or their teacher. And yet, if you want your boundaries to be intact and respected, sometimes the onus will be on you to teach the people around you what boundaries are while actually setting them. So, what do we have to learn from the repeat offenders, those people that continue to cross our boundaries or break boundaries, boundary breakers? We can learn to be better communicators. Interesting, right? That their crossing of boundaries can teach us to actually articulate our stance better. We can practice being more assertive, and we can redirect frustration with them to find solutions to the boundaries that are being crossed. We can teach BBs what the parameters are for interacting with us. You know, we can actually create a boundary while teaching them what the boundaries are in order to continue to have access to us. And we can also see it as an opportunity to clarify who we are, okay? Who you are and where you are and what you're comfortable with. So when repeat offenders continue to break boundaries and cross boundaries, instead of becoming frustrated and just feeling like, there's nothing, it's hopeless, there's nothing you can do, see it as an opportunity for you to become a more assertive solution-oriented communicator who is setting the tone, setting the parameters in terms of what is required in order for people to have access to you and interact with you. See it overall as an opportunity to communicate better, ultimately to get what you want. That's actually called interpersonal effectiveness. So as we engage with people, if we learn to be clear communicators, we will reap the benefits of healthier relationships. I absolutely encourage clear, assertive communication at all times with all people. And here are some ways to communicate clear, firm boundaries. When you make your statement, be clear and to the point, but always add what I call is a sealant. Seal the deal, seal the statement with a clear second statement that is undeniable, okay? So that we're all on the same page. So I'll give you some examples. Number one, please do not call me after 10 p.m. That's pretty clear, right? But the sealant is, thank you for honoring my wishes. So you're adding to that, not only am I telling you what I want, but I'm also thanking you. Okay. So that now they're like, oh, okay, now, and then they may still cross the boundary, right? A serious BB is going to continue to cross the boundary. And I'm not saying this is an exhaustive list or that what I'm sharing in this message is absolutely the way to cure the problem. I'm just giving some information that may be helpful to help you be less frustrated when dealing with people who continue to cross boundaries. And I'm offering some suggestions that may make it easier to communicate clearly to them. All right. Number two, I don't respond to phone or video calls on social media. The sealant is, please respect my wishes. Okay. Number three, I'm not comfortable sharing personal information with you. The sealant, thank you for respecting my position on this. Okay, so hopefully you're getting the idea. You can change the sealant to whatever you think is appropriate. Obviously, if the people continue to violate you in any way or disrespect you in any way, then your sealant may become more assertive, more aggressive, like the next time you step on my property, I will call the police. That's pretty extreme, right? But if depends, I guess, on what your situation is and how you feel your boundaries are being crossed. Okay, here's another one. I'm not going to do that. The sealant is, I appreciate you respecting my stance on this. Like you're just not going to do it. You're not going to entertain it. You're not going to do it. That doesn't align. That's not working. No, I'm not going to do that. I appreciate you respecting my stance on this. So you're not saying they have to agree with your stance. They don't even have to understand your stance, but you appreciate them respecting your stance on this. Sometimes people will try and when you say no or you set a boundary, some people think that it's a debate or an opportunity for discussion, but that's not, most of the time, that's not the case, is it? When we set a boundary, we just want people to respect it. It's not up for discussion. And so we want to be very clear. This is my position. Thank you for respecting my stance. Okay, here's another one. That doesn't align with me. That doesn't align with my goals. That doesn't align with my values. Or that doesn't support my goals. That doesn't support my values. That doesn't support my way of being, my mental health, my emotional health, my lifestyle, my spirituality, whatever you want, you fill in the blank and then add the sealant that you think is appropriate. Number 6, that is not the direction I'm going in. Very clear. So they're like, okay, this is what I want to do, and I want to do this, and I want to build that, and I want to da-da-da, and I felt like you could do this, and you could handle that. No, that's not the direction I'm going in. Here's the sealant. Thank you for respecting my personal choice. In other words, I do have free will, and I'm deciding how I want to move forward or how I want to live my life. Thank you for respecting my personal choice. Here's another one, number 7. Actually, I don't like that. just very clear, and then you add the sealant that you think is appropriate. Okay. It might be something like, I don't like that. I'm going to um, go through the items and figure out what I like and what works for me. Okay, just as an example. Number 8, that is uncomfortable for me. Don't do that again. Okay, the sealant was a little bit more aggressive. Don't do that again. Number 9, I'm not interested in doing that. Please don't ask me again. Number 10, I'm not going to explain why I don't want to do it. I would like for you to accept and respect that I'm not going to do that. So, for people who experience boundary breakers and boundary crossers trying to um, get you to explain your stance as if it was up for discussion, it's a flat, I'm not going to explain why I don't want to do it. I already said I don't want to do it. The sealant is, I would like for you to accept and respect that I'm not going to do that. All right, in closing, a few other notes. Don't apologize unless you are actually sorry for something. You don't have to apologize for setting boundaries. So when you say, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me, I encourage you to remove the I'm sorry and just say, that doesn't work for me. Okay. We don't need to apologize to people who continue to repeat our boundaries or who continue to cross our boundaries. Um, we don't have to appeal to them. We don't have to feel badly about setting the boundaries. What we want to do is actually um, firm up our stance. If you have a boundary, you don't want to be passive and you don't want to apologize for anything because you don't have to apologize. You don't need to apologize for having standards. You don't need to apologize for having boundaries. Also, be assertive, okay? Not passive aggressive or aggressive, just be assertive. You can have a more assertive tone, very strong tones, but try to remain assertive. If you become passive aggressive, or aggressive, oftentimes people who cross boundaries feel like they're going to have wiggle room because they think you're now in emotional mind rather than wise mind or logic mind. Okay. So if we look at DBT, there's emotional mind, which is just wigging out, becoming easily dysregulated, and there's logic mind that is, so rational, there's no emotion involved, and then there's monkey mind, which is just there's no rhyme or reason to the thought process or the behavior. It's just completely chaotic, crazy, and also probably dysregulated. Of those three, we want to be in wise mind. And wise mind is a combination, a natural balance between emotional mind or emotional thinking and logic mind and logic thinking. When you bring logic and emotion together, you have wise mind, you have a lot of wisdom. So stay in your assertive communication stance, be concise, and add a sealer. So there is no room for confusion about your boundaries.